Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, Chair. Could we have you test your audio visual?
Testing.
We hear you.
It won't let me start the video.
Okay.
That's what's been going on for a little while now.
Are you all right if we start without your video? Or do you want a moment to work
Give
through
me a
it?
second.
Okay,
I'm trying to get this meeting to go.
of course, you got it, Chair.
Okay. Looks like it's in.
Thank you. And we do have a quorum, Chair.
Hey, fantastic. Well, then, good afternoon, everyone. I will call the second Regional Equitable Housing Subcommittee to order. And before we begin, I would like to ask our interpreter, Carlos, to walk through how we access interpretation services.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I will begin with the instructions in Spanish and I will be back with the instructions in English. Muy buenas tardes y bienvenidos, bienvenidas a esta segunda sesión del Subcomité Regional sobre Equidad en Vivienda. Se está ofreciendo servicio de interpretación simultánea. Para hacer uso del mismo, por favor desplácese a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom donde aparecen sus controles. Ahí haga clic en el icono de interpretación, parece un globo terráqueo y seleccione Spanish o Español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom en su celular, tableta, etc., presione primero más, los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Por último, si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio o silenciar audio original. Once again, interpretation is being provided to and from Spanish. In the event that there are any Spanish comments, we invite all monolingual English speakers to take advantage of the feature. To do so, please scroll down to the bottom of the Zoom screen where your meeting controls are. There you will see an interpretation icon. It looks like a little world, and you would select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app on a cell phone, tablet, or other mobile device, you would first press More, the three dots, then Interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on Mute Original Audio to not hear the original Spanish low in the background. Gracias, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. So first up is non-agenda public and member comments. Clerk, do we have any non-agenda public comments?
I do not see any virtual public commenters on this item, Chair.
Okay. Do we have any non-agenda member comments?
I do not see any hands raised from your members either, Chair.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So the next item up is approval of the meeting minutes. Are there any public comments on this item?
I see no public commenters on this item.
Move approval, Hebner.
Thank you.
Second, Sotelo Solis.
Thank you. Francesca, can you please call the roll call?
For the city of San Diego is absent. For the county of San Diego, Chair Tara Lawson-Raymer.
Aye.
For East County, Vice Mayor Jack Shu.
Yes, or aye.
For North County Coastal, Mayor Lisa Hebner.
Yes.
For South County, Mayor Alejandra Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, aye.
And the City of San Diego Council Member Joe LaCava is also absent. And that item passes unanimously with those members present.
Okay, thank you so much. So I guess we're moving on to the reports. Allison Wood will be giving us an overview of the Regional Equitable Housing Framework. And this is an opportunity for us all on this committee to provide input on the development of the framework. So staff is going to provide an overview and then we'll have an opportunity for input. So Allison, please.
Thank you, Chair Lawson-Raymer and subcommittee members. I'm excited to talk about the Regional Equitable Housing Framework and get your input today. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. And as you'll recall, the framework is one of the three elements of your work plan for this subcommittee. Next slide. So just as an overview of what this framework is meant to do, it's really intended to outline the goals, policies, and regional actions to address the housing crisis in the San Diego region. Now, we already have our RENA plan. We have our 2021 regional plan that provide the foundation for this framework. So this is not meant to be duplicative, but it's really meant to bring the policies from those plans to more specific strategies and actions for Sandag. So the framework will help define Sandag's role as a housing leader. We play a unique role as a regional agency, and we want to make sure that our work in housing is complementary and fits well within the broader housing ecosystem. And then finally, the framework will include near-term implementation actions to guide our work at Sandag over the next couple years. So the timeline for developing this framework is pretty quick, and we've already done a lot of the groundwork on this. So we're ready to get your input on the most important parts related to Sandag's role and those implementation actions. So we've received some input from a housing task force that we assembled earlier this month, and I'll talk a little bit about the input we received later in the presentation. We'll continue discussions with you all here at the subcommittee and hopefully seek a recommendation from you all sometime this spring before we would seek acceptance from our board later this summer. And just to give you a sense for the final product that we're anticipating for this, we want this to be a really user-friendly, easy to digest document. We're aiming for something in the 10 to 15 page realm, just to give you a sense, something very focused on these elements. Okay. So as I mentioned, we've done a lot of groundwork on the framework already as we've been developing our housing acceleration program activities at Sandag. And so early on in this process, we conducted interviews with local governments in our region with many of your staff to share their experiences and barriers to accelerating housing production. And so some of the common themes that emerged are on the screen here. And the most often cited barriers to affordable housing development were the following. We have lack of vacant or developable land, lack of staff capacity to process new housing applications, especially for smaller cities in our region, the high cost of infill development, insufficient funding for affordable housing, and then navigating the regulatory framework that we're in. So some conflicts between coastal zone regulations and state mandated housing requirements. So with this input from jurisdictions, combined with what we know about the current cost of housing and the need to produce much more housing to meet demands, that all informed the 5 policy goals that we're proposing to guide our framework. So these are the 5 Ps. The first is to produce housing for all. So this is about supporting and implementing policies to increase housing production of all kinds in locations that enhance quality of life. The second is preserve vulnerable housing. So really supporting proactive strategies to preserve at-risk affordable housing. The third is promote equity, inclusion, and sustainability. So implementing housing solutions that address the legacy of inequity in housing and ensure that safe, healthy, and accessible and inclusive housing opportunities are available to everyone. And that our housing solutions should promote sustainability, preservation of open space, and climate resilient communities. The fourth P is to protect tenants. So supporting tenant rights, creating protections to minimize economic eviction or unsustainable rent increases. And then the fifth is prevent displacement. So implementing policies that prevent vulnerable residents from harmful outcomes of displacement resulting from neighborhood improvements. Slide. So this is a slide that we included at your first subcommittee meeting in February. This is how we've been proposing to define Sandag's role as a housing leader, really structuring it around these 3 areas. We have local jurisdiction support, data analysis and policy resources, and regional initiatives. And so for local jurisdiction support, this really is about equipping our member agencies and your staff with the resources and the capacity to implement pro-housing best practices and to implement your local housing elements. For data analysis and policy resources, this is using our regional role to be collecting and analyzing data to help us monitor trends and inform policies. And for regional initiatives, these are areas where we can coordinate regional leadership, like this group that we have here with our subcommittee, and accelerating housing investments across the region. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that we want specific implementation actions in this framework. And we have a few ideas that we see as clear actions for Sandag that I'll walk through here on this slide. So the first is to continue our ongoing housing acceleration program activities. So these are activities that are currently funded by our REAP 1.0 funding that we received from the state. Includes some of the recent grants that we awarded to jurisdictions, our Housing Policy Leadership Academy that's going on right now, some other studies that we'll be getting underway, including an anti-displacement study, and we have some other technical assistance activities as part of that program that we'll be deploying this year. The second is the Regional Finance Authority legislation, which you have next on your agenda, so I won't go into detail on that now. The third on this list is our REAP 2.0 application. So under the REAP 2.0 program from the state, Sandag is eligible for $43 million in formula funds for the region. And so we'll be working to develop a program around these funds and submit our application before the end of 2022. And the state just released their draft guidelines on this program. And based on those draft guidelines, we anticipate a significant focus on advancing affordable housing and addressing economic recovery due to COVID. Next, we have our grant programs and board policy updates. So with our new regional plan and the new funding sources from the state, from the REAP program, we feel like we'll need to take a fresh look at our grant programs at Sandag and our related board policies, and potentially make updates to those. And then finally, we have revenue opportunities on this list. So we recognize with a finance authority that could provide a structure for receiving and deploying funds in the region, but we'll need to do more work to investigate potential revenue opportunities and really understand the impact of those on our region. Okay, and so my final slide here, I wanted to share some of the feedback that we received from our housing task force earlier this month. So we assembled a group of about 30 individuals from a variety of sectors involved in housing policy and development in our region. And during that meeting, we discussed the regional equitable housing framework, asked the group to weigh in on some of the top priorities for Sandag and to provide other considerations. So the top priorities that we heard were to investigate that opportunity for a regional finance authority, continuing our work on local government grants and supporting our local jurisdictions with technical assistance. And then other considerations that we heard were to keep equity at the forefront, support for a variety of housing options. So I have some examples here that came up during our discussions around ADUs, middle income, workforce housing, mobile homes, prefab housing, just supporting a wide array of housing options. Leveraging partnerships with the private sector, large employers, universities, improving the permitting process for small infill projects, supporting the creation of good jobs as we do our housing work and build housing, and then also a focus on sustainability in how we design and build housing as well. So incentivizing green build and looking at all electric homes to support our climate goals. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll turn it back to you, Chair, for discussion.
So I'm talking and I'm mute. I said, thank you so much. That was really helpful. So I think now we should see if there's any public comments before we move to member comments.
I do see one hand raised under the public comments.
Great.
Susan Baldwin, please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. My name is Susan Baldwin, and I think I know all of you. I worked at Sandex for 27 years as a planner, and I worked on the three arenas. And I'm calling to propose that you look very seriously at a region-wide or inclusionary housing program. It is a powerful tool. About half the jurisdictions in the region have inclusionary ordinances, and it would be very helpful to have those ordinances in every jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any additional public comments?
No, Chair, that was all. Thank you.
Great. Then I will turn it over to member comments. I have some as well, but I'd love to hear from my colleagues first. Anyone has anything to kick us off? I think I see Mayor Huebner's hand.
Yeah, just found the icon. Just quickly, could you explain who was on the housing task force? Was this staff or or who else?
Yeah, let me get our list up there, but we assembled a group for a discussion that included folks from a variety of organizations in our region. I'm just pulling up our list. We had folks from places like UCSD, folks involved in different labor organizations, environmental organizations. Let's see, other Sandex staff that are on the phone and want to help chime in on this one, feel free. But we had the BIA on there. So it was meant to, complement the work we've done with our local jurisdictions and conversations we have with our planning directors, like at the technical working group, to kind of hear from other entities in the region. So no, Tueri, if you.
No, I was just going to echo the things that you said. It really was bringing in a broad array of people who are actually working on accelerating housing, those who are in labor, in the building industry, those who are also employers, because we believe that there's a multifaceted approach, and those, who are seeking for housing to be accelerated in the region because they're looking for that for those who work for them. So it was a pretty broad list beyond just Sandex staff or city staff. We, as Allison said, we do engage with city staff via our formal working groups at Sandex, our regional planning technical working group. And so this was an opportunity to really engage with those stakeholders outside of our working group platforms.
Very good. So one of the items that I have I'd like a little more information on, and that is improved permitting process for small infill projects. I mean, each of our cities has their own permitting process, and to have a regional body get involved in that, I mean, there's areas where it could be helpful and there's other areas where it would be intrusive. So I'm wondering if you could explain a little bit more what was meant by that particular bullet point.
Yeah, and I think that would really be any kind of activities that we're doing to improve permitting would be done in conjunction with the jurisdictions. It wouldn't be any kind of blanket approach, but working with each city and finding out what types of resources could be helpful. Are there other tools that we could develop at Sandex to provide templates, or if we could provide additional consultant resources, for example, to help review applications, anything we can do to help build capacity within the individual jurisdictions to do what they want to do, the process projects.
Right, that's a good explanation. I appreciate that, and that would be helpful. I didn't get the last two bullet points because it went by too quickly. So after improved permitting process for small infill projects, would you mind just telling me what the other two were?
Yeah, we can pull that back up. We had supporting job creation, and then incentivizing green builds and all electric homes. There you go.
Got it. Okay, thanks so much.
Yeah.
I think Councilmember Shu is up next.
Oh, thank you. There was a conversation we had at the full board when I think we got information on the REAP program, the grant program. I thought I'd carry on that conversation a bit more. First of all, can you briefly tell me again what these grants are for? Are they planning grants for the cities, and is that correct? And maybe to you could extend that explanation a bit more with a few sentences. What do they really provide for the cities?
Sure. So the REAP 2.0 program, again, it's about $43 million we're expected to receive at Sandag. And then we would develop a program to sub-allocate those funds. So it can be used for some planning activities, although the state is indicating that they're more focused on capital programs and they want to see this money going toward direct investments into communities. So we're anticipating perhaps a more focus on capital. And that would be, we need to submit our application to the state by the end of the year. So throughout the year, we'd work with you all, with our working groups to figure out exactly how we would sub-allocate those funds. Some could be a competitive process. There could be other ways that we want to do that.
Great. So as we deal with that, what kind of criteria are we really looking at? And I know sometimes there's the primary criteria, but perhaps we can develop some secondary criteria to help incentivize the kind of changes we're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, so far what we've seen from the state is that they want to see a focus on infill development. They want to see investments that support implementation of our sustainable communities strategy, that support GHG reduction, VMT reduction, and equity goals. So they're looking at transformative, really comprehensive projects to be funded with these dollars. So we're going to, there's a lot to discuss there and be creative about that criteria.
Great. And it was just brought up in the comments about inclusionary housing policy, region-wide, if not by city. Is there any room for that kind of discussion in the grant program?
I think we could discuss that, whether it's through grant program or technical assistance that we could provide to local jurisdictions. I think we can discuss that with our jurisdictions.
Yeah, and because I think grant programs have a ability to urge change or a particular direction, and in our discussions, I think we didn't get here to our current state by accident in terms of lack of affordable housing in our region. I think we have certain systems that either didn't work or systems that cause this discrepancy of housing availability and affordability and the inequities that we have in our community. So I hope we do look at these systems and come up with systems to either change that or to turn it back around. And so I think a systems approach would be another way to go about this and change this. And lastly, I know we talked about greenhouse gas emissions, sustainability, but I hope at some point in back of our minds, we'll also, or maybe we can make it one of the other criteria, is the sociological needs of housing. So we talk about greening these places, but sometimes they lack play areas, open areas for families. Perhaps we should do something about making sure that they're located in places with at least some adjustment for air quality. Long ago in my former life, I dealt with what's the behavior of children given the levels of access to open space. And that those things can also be brought in. So not only do we want affordable housing, but we'll throw in one more criteria is ones that are healthy and okay for people to live in. Because I think that's been one of the errors in the past, that housing that is developed by government or government helps develop end up being terrible places to live, and we cause a lot of other social harms. So I hope we consider that as well. We want a green environment, but we also want a housing that's developed that is socially acceptable, if not good, for the populations we're trying to serve. And often I think that gets overlooked, as well as dealing with the systems approach. But I'm really encouraged that we're moving forward on that and look forward to seeing what we come up with and the consultants or the advisors that we've already gotten. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Shu. Mayor Sotelo Solis.
Gracias, Chair. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I have to agree with my colleagues and the comments that have already been made. I think we're here because we just don't want to be a committee that says, yes, we really love this, let's move forward. We're about pushing the envelope and providing the opportunity and the funding to say, okay, let's do this. Let's not just wait, let's not put the file on the shelf, let's do this. So one of the things that I would love to hear is, maybe there is a long list of potential opportunities. For example, as Vice Mayor Shu mentioned, the greening of space. As we talk about housing, what elements could get more, I don't want to say points, but more approval from the community? Let's say that they incorporated a rooftop garden or a wall of plants or treetop canopies that, shared the space. I think if we start setting the bar of what we want as the minimum countywide, and that's just one element, open space, maybe they have an atrium as part of their building. I think those, right, Jack? I think like all of these things, why can't we dream big? And I think it's that pushing of the envelope, because you don't know what you don't know. And if we create this comprehensive wish list of minimum bar, then we can say, look, these are the elements and you have to hit at least one or two, or hell, hit all of them, what we want you to do. And that's just in the greening. And I think it really also too allows the developers to say, look, I get it. And us to also to be realistic. We know not everything can be included. But if we say then, okay, if it's not this, and you are in an area that has a very high cal enviro screen because of toxic pollution that's in the air, then you're gonna do the minimum standard with double window panes and HVAC that includes HEPA filters, again, recognizing COVID-19, exacerbated many of those communities that were lacking those elements. I think it really speaks to what we are now expecting. Same thing with us setting benchmarks for success. So I think as a collective, I know I asked it at the last meeting and it was like, well, it's to build, how many units, Toy?
171,000.
71,000.
Yeah, not that we're counting, right? But 171,000. I think we need to repeat that every single time. Because if we don't restate our mission, and they're at the, I would say council chambers, but at Sandex chambers, we have our mission at the back of the room. So every single time our board meets, you see it and you're reminded. When you see that, it's repetition. For athletes, it becomes second nature and you don't question what you're doing, but there's muscle memory. And I think as elected officials, we juggle so many things that if it becomes second nature, as we talk about housing, I think we need to remember it's 171,000, but I know for mine, it's 5,438. Now, so knowing those two elements and how they are very much, synonymous with success, but and knowing what the consequences are as well if we do not get there. So I think it's a carrot, hey, this is our mission, this is what we're going, but also too, that there may be consequences. We haven't seen anybody get the, official slap on the wrist or whatever that is. I know threat of funding is that, but I think just making that obvious every single time. Second is, you mentioned ADU standards. For our community, it's something new that we are starting to venture into. I know that Chair Blakespear has had, the plug and play. These are the ministerial versions of ADUs that you can have. I would really love to see how we can take shows on the road of what is successful And again, maybe it's us at the board meeting saying, hey, I'd like to hear it. And, maybe the 5 of us here or the 4 of us, we're the ones that say, okay, please come to us. But offering it to our colleagues, this is what works, best management practices. And this is how they got there. From resolution, who introduced it, what the resolution was, who on their staff works for it, and, A, B, C, D. Maybe it's a whole workshop on it. I don't care how you all set it up. I just think we get a lot of email messages about, oh, hey, what about this? Can you come in? And sometimes I don't think it's just connected enough to our greater goal of 171. And then just lastly, addressing the need to update older housing stock. Us being the second oldest community in the county, we have some homes that are over 100 years old, and families are still living there. And then even, homes that are still built in the 1950s or even, 30, 40, 50s, they're still being used, and how we address those needs. If there's through the REAP 2.0, is there going to be a focus on that type of housing stock? And I'm not talking about the historical homes and, those that are on the, registry, but those that have, are lacking proper window installations, a multitude of other things. But many communities have endured for way too long. And I think that might be something that for the older housing stock, we focus potential funding for that. So I'll take a breath, I'll have my coffee, but I really appreciate the but lots of ideas, and I think we're gonna push that envelope, and I want us to be successful. And as us, and I know the chair mentioned it last meeting, like how do we get to that success? And I think it's all of these ideas kind of coming together. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
I mentioned earlier, I like that beach, man. I'm jealous. I wish I was out on the beach.
I think I have all the beach in the whole county.
Oh, that's true.
You can come visit anytime. Thank you so much. So I have a couple comments as well, and then we'll go back to Mayor Huebner. First of all, I really do want to echo and uplift the comments of my colleagues. I think the few things really stuck out for me with that my colleagues have shared so far. And then I wanted to go back to the slide, and I had a couple sort of comments on the slide. So, one of the themes I'm really hearing from my colleagues is that we want to build homes that people actually want to live in, right? I heard about a green roof. I heard about green walls. I heard about atriums. I heard about walkability and livability and bikeability. And I think this is really, really, really important. I definitely began this endeavor with some trepidation, understanding that you have too often in history seen government intervention in the housing market go very awry with homes built that are somehow built not for the people building the homes, built for some other people. And I want us to build homes for ourselves, homes that we would want to live in, that we would want our kids to live in. These are homes for us. These are homes for our neighbors. These are not for some other. This is for us. And I have some really specific comments in terms of how we think about operationalizing that, but I just wanted to put that out there as like a thought and a principle for Sandag, for staff, as you sort of try to think about refining the criteria for grants in particular, and for this framework, that we need to figure out how to support and incentivize houses that you want to live in, that I want to live in. It's not for someone else, it's for us. And I come back to that over and over again, and just, green roofs and green walls and all these pieces that make a house a home. I thought that was really, really important, kind of coming from all of my colleagues in different ways. I also thought there was a really useful point being made around how do we do a better job of providing like real carrots around inclusionary. Because I think that is clearly a piece of the work we need to do. That it is true, we might sacrifice a little bit in terms of number of units built, but if we are genuinely focused on equity and mixed income communities, and obviously inclusionary is a really important part of the toolkit. So that was the second thing I heard coming from my colleagues I wanted to uplift. And then the third thing I heard from Mayor Sotelo Solis was about the ADUs, but I think it was kind of more broadly that we have a lot of cities that might not, that are smaller, and maybe they don't have the capacity to put together their own pre-approved ADU. But there's things that we could do, and that's probably one of a few things that we could do to offer as a toolkit. I think the ADUs is a really nice one. It could be a toolkit that we could offer that could be pre-approved, but I think there's other toolkits that we could look at that we can develop that then some of our smaller cities could just utilize as useful, and not as Mayor Huebner has rightly pointed out, every city's different. So it's not that they would be mandated, but would just be available as an option as might be helpful. So those are some thoughts, just kind of building off my colleagues' comments. If you wouldn't mind putting the slide back up, the last slide, I had a couple comments related to that as well. Yeah, I think these are really wonderful priorities. I think some of this incentivizing around green building is really important to foreground, because it can certainly get lost in the shuffle, because that's definitely not the way that we always build. So I think that's important. The equity piece is important. Certainly the variety of housing options. I would love us to talk a little bit more at some point, and we can do it at a future meeting, but just about how we structure this to leverage partnerships with the private sector, with employers, with universities. And I'm going to add to that schools and our school districts, because I think that we certainly have an issue of teachers who are living extremely far from the communities that they're serving, and I think that would be another partnership that we should be exploring. And I had some other thoughts kind of more structurally, but I think it would be good to just get a bunch of ideas out there, and then we can kind of return to some of the more structural thoughts. So with that, I'll just call on Mayor Huebner.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of other thoughts on this. I think it's really important, as has been mentioned, the environment that we're creating for these homes. And one of the things that we see a lot, unfortunately, is pushback from community members. And it's always, to me, when I've looked at these, it's because the actual edifice, the building, doesn't fit in. It doesn't fit into the community. It doesn't transition nicely. It sticks out like a sore thumb. And so I think to incentivize input and dialogue with the community is very important. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to see adversarial relationships. I think it's very important. I've been fortunate to work with developers here to create affordable housing, and we've negotiated with them and managed to get more affordable housing. Unfortunately, some of the state legislation has removed that ability from us, but it would be great to, as a best practice, put that back into practice. The other thing I wanted to say is that within the green, we have to have schools. Like if we're looking at Sereno Valley as a really great area where we could build this because it's near an employment center, you have to have schools nearby so that you create a neighborhood, and rather than people driving their kids elsewhere to schools. And I think that's super important to have some sort of, radius or whatever. The ADU idea, we have looked at that, but our topography is such that it's not easy for us to do boilerplate. But I think it would be a great thing for the region, for those who can do boilerplate, to have that available. For beach cities, it's really, Granny Flats are part of the culture, and they really work well as that missing middle piece in many places, and sometimes lower income. As far as the leveraging partnerships, I just want to be mindful of what's happening at UC Berkeley. They're not planning for their own housing for their students, and I don't want to see that happening here. I see UCSD seems to be planning quite well for their housing, and that's important because it makes it very difficult for people to afford college. And then also in terms of inclusionary, we do have an inclusionary, and I just want to, it's an important tool for us, very important tool for us, because it's almost all we have to ask developers to put in inclusionary housing. But please look at what that means. So I'm just going to give my example because I know my numbers and I know everybody's a little bit different, but we have 875 for our RENA numbers. Of those, 630 are extremely low, low, very low, or moderate. To rely on our inclusionary 15% to get that, we'd have to build 4,200 units for 15% to be 630. Our whole city right now has 6,200 units. So there's a flaw here in some of these numbers. We're doing our best to get affordable housing built. Inclusionary is one of our tools, but we're going to, I don't know how we're going to do this throughout the region, because I think there's a larger number that has to be built in order to use that as our only tool. And we just don't have the capacity in infrastructure, land, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted to point that out. And that's all of my comments on this item. Thank you.
Sorry, Mayor Huebner, would you mind if I just ask you a follow-up question?
No, of course.
You know, usually we ask staff, but you just something so interesting. So if you were going to, I mean, you know your city so well. So what are the, like, if you just explained why inclusion is so challenging for you to use, because it just, the numbers don't add up. What, and 15% is what you were talking about. What if you did 30? I'm not saying that's possible, but is there an approach around inclusionary that you think would be more helpful for Solana Beach?
I'm saying that inclusionary is a great tool, but I think it points out sort of how the RENA process is a little bit broken in that manner. But for us, we've been told that if we were to increase it too much because of our high land value, HCD would not approve it, because it would make it unaffordable for developers to build it. Because what we're relying on in inclusionary, of course, is the market value, the market rate units to pay for those affordable units. And so then those market rate units get more and more and more and more expensive to pay for more and more of those. That increases speculation, and then the market goes up, and then everything around it, all of those market rate units become more expensive too. Our hugest problem, I think, in maybe in the whole region is displacement that we're seeing. I'm getting emails every day from, oh, so-and-so is putting up our house for sale. We've lived in it and rented it for 20 years. Where are we going to go? We want to stay in the community. And they're going to, take that, and they're going to build, more homes on it and rent them all for market rate and make a lot more money. So there's something here that we, I think, have to address about policies that look at housing as a home versus housing as an investment vehicle. And I don't know, I don't have the answer to that, but I don't want to mislead that inclusionary is bad. Inclusionary is great. And I think 15 to 20%, we might consider raising ours. The other thing about ours is we do not allow for in lieu fees, with that, except in very, very, very narrow exemptions, so that we really do make them build those houses, or units, I should say, here in Solana Beach. I think it's an important thing to add to your inclusionary. I'm just pointing out what, in order to meet our RENA numbers, you got to build a lot if you're relying only on inclusionary.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Mayor Sotelo-Solis.
Thank you so much, Chair. I think adding to the conversation, as we look at just zoning and code that defines kind of where housing is supposed to be built. But when we talk about bedroom communities and things that are away from transportation hubs or things that connect people, there's this whole theory that you build things where it makes sense, to the point that was made earlier. Why put it out where people have to have a vehicle to get around? And that brings me to the universal design or lens of age friendly. Because if we talk about, okay, right now I'm able-bodied, I can hop in a car, go to where I need to get, but let's just say I break my leg surfing. I'm not, knock on wood, I don't surf, but let's just say something were to happen, I would then have to have more help in so many elements, but even my house design would then be a challenge to my livelihood. And if we were to create or have, again, that litmus of what we want, that universal design. And again, I know it seems like it's more expensive, but if you have children or you have an elder, the enchufe, plug that's down at the bottom, I mean, it's not good for kids or elders to have to bend down and try to plug things in, but wouldn't it be cooler if it was up higher and you didn't have to exert so much energy? Or doorknobs, that makes sense for all ages. If you have 2 coffee cups, you just like hit the thing and then roll in, as opposed to having to, you know, put 3 cups of coffee on the side and spill everything. Lighting, all of those elements, I think, are especially important. So the universal design. And again, it's the zoning that I would love to help empower my colleagues. Sometimes it's a good thing. You know, we can blame the zoning. We can't do that because it's not allowed. But other times, maybe there is a way just to change it just slightly to allow for us to push the envelope just a smidge, because housing makes sense in that area. And then lastly, the prefab. I would love to learn a whole lot more about that, because I know that we've always, you know, we talk about the cost of housing, but if things are already prefabricated, but now they have union components to it, to where the foundation is built union, the electrical is, you know, installed union. So it's that balance of prefabrication to a certain point, but not excluding our union brothers and sisters to balance the workforce and labor force. So I would love to learn more. And if I think local folks as well that, you know, have skin in the game here locally, see us trying to get to that 171, I think is essential. So yeah, and again, I don't know what that that zoning thought is, but I think Jennifer might know. I think I learned it in her academy, but anyway, that's the.
Mayor Stelzlis, is that a formal request to Sandex staff to help us better understand opportunities around using union labor produced prefab? Is that what I'm hearing you ask? Basically, you're saying you're interested in prefab, but you wanted to make sure it's that there's opportunities to around using union labor.
Yeah, I mean, what are the options to really seeing from A to Z? You know, this is where it's prefabricated and it's still in a cargo container in Long Beach, you know, that has not been unloaded, that is still an issue. Or do we have something here in one of the communities that might be an opportunity even for us here to have showcased in our community? Pilot program, something small, demonstration project that we can show success. So I would love to see that and how to balance it again with that union workforce. Chair, I also see Ms. Lassar has opened up her camera. I don't know if she was going to answer.
Chair, if I may, would it be helpful to offer a comment?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Mayor Satellis, love your enthusiasm, you know, for modular, and we think modular at scale could really substantially bring the cost of housing down across San Diego County. And the best known plant is Factory OS, where the carpenters are actually building the housing, the carpenters union. And there's some other modular firms that are showing promise in California as well. So I think, you know, with Sandag's permission, we could probably put together a short PowerPoint on some of those firms and what we're seeing, and even possibly, you know, bring in a few of them to talk here in this meeting with you. I don't know that we can do a tour to Northern California, but there's also, I think, a modular factory in Orange County. But we're certainly thinking about, could we in San Diego actually entice a modular factory here to work with us, right, with local governments in a coordinated manner, and make it viable for them and help bring our costs down in terms of production. And in your community where you have a lot of infill and houses are smaller, it could be especially beneficial.
Yeah, and through the chair, I would just say, yep, using the right language. I mean, I kept saying prefab, you said modular. So if that's, you know, just having the right vocabulary I think also too helps us show that expertise, but even, you know, what's more of importance even for that industry, what they consider themselves. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, Tuari, let me ask you, I think Jen seemed to be responding pretty closely to what Mayor Sotelo-Solis was asking for. I also think that would be quite helpful to better understand the landscape of modular and how it could potentially or not, I think is the question, right? Could or could not meet some of the needs of the kind of housing we've been discussing, including the sort of expressed concerns from my colleague around labor standards and union labor. So if that's a feasible PowerPoint to have put together, I think it would be quite helpful.
Yeah, we can certainly work with LaSar Development Corp and Jennifer here. They're a consultant to Sandag on this work. And so we can work with them to see about bringing something that a presentation back to this subcommittee. And we can certainly, Mayor Sotelo-Solis, I think, look at opportunities. And if there is an opportunity to do something where we could go and take a tour, as Jennifer said, there's maybe not much here, but if there's really a desire of the subcommittee to do something further away, we can explore working internally on what that might entail and the type of planning that it would take to put that together. So certainly if it's an interest of the subcommittee, we as staff will go back and look at it further.
Let's just start with a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Okay.
Take it from there. So I think Councilmember Shu had his hand up.
I was going to just make a quick comment. Many years ago, I toured a modular home factory on an Indian reservation that was federally funded to help young people develop a trade and build these modular homes that got delivered. They met specifications for many counties, and but it was developed to help communities and young people develop a trade as well as build inexpensive homes. So I think all that can be wrapped into many benefits other than besides the issue of building homes that are affordable. And I think that is something that we have to look into. The systems that are in play now are not working for us with regards to finding an infill developer, making sure their cost is low, and making it attractive for their investors. I think that's something that we have to look at and think of other models to pursue, as well as the kind of homes we're trying to build. So I hope that comes into our play. If the system was working, we wouldn't be in the trouble we're in now.
Well, thank you to all my colleagues. I'm seeing no additional member comments. I have a question. So Tuari, my understanding is that the next step is for you all to sort of take all this feedback and discussion. And you have, I think my understanding is you have two kind of documents you need to produce. One is really how do we, what the grant criteria are, like how do we even prioritize and screen out versus prioritize the scarce resources in terms of distribution, so that you can kind of take this feedback and work on that. And then as well, there's obviously a big interest here in the modular piece. Is there any other next steps besides those two on this specific item?
No, and well, one additional thing, I guess, the grant criteria is something that's separate from what Allison presented here today. So that's related more to our REAP 2.0 program and the 43 million. So there'll be lots of opportunities as we start doing outreach on and coming to the subcommittee on how we would use those funds for us to engage with you on the criteria. So that's something that would probably come a little later in the late summer, early fall. And that is also something that would go to the board of directors. And then the item that you're asking about with really looking at more of a presentation for the modular, we can look at bringing that back at the next subcommittee meeting. And then our team, Allison is leading the effort in taking the framework. And then we'll want to take all of the feedback we have here today and really bring that forward as a recommendation item for this subcommittee to ask that our board would take action on approval.
Great. Okay. I don't think we need a motion. This is just a discussion item. So clerk, unless I need a motion, I'm just going to move on to the next item.
You do not need a motion on this item. It's just discussion, Chair.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This was wonderful stuff and really helpful and a great conversation. So next, what we have up is item 5, which is this idea of a potential San Diego Regional Housing Finance Authority, which I've definitely spoken with all of you at length. And if you haven't talked to me at length, you've spoken with Jeff at length, or Cody at length, or someone at great length. So I know we've all been talking about this kind of in circles a little bit, and there's been a lot of conversations, but we now have some momentum because Senator Russo decided to jump on board and help drive this forward, and has introduced a bill in the Senate to actually make this idea real. So, I think I just wanted to take a little bit of time to kick us off with a conceptual overview, and then we should have a robust discussion about how we want to move forward. So, and I think we all know we're here on this subcommittee because housing is a huge challenge in our community, but we're not alone in that challenge. And other parts of California have been working for some time on promising regional solutions. So, for example, the Bay Area put forward legislation in 2019 to create a regional housing finance agency, and they received $20 million from the state last year through that entity. And LA County has been working on their effort since last year as well, also to create a regional housing finance agency. So I guess I would say riding on those coattails, or jumping in to give us a hand here in our endeavor, Senator Ben Wesso introduced a bill, SB 1105, that would create a San Diego version of this regional housing finance agency, building on the other two efforts I mentioned. So I wanted to share, I have some kind of initial thoughts about what a San Diego effort could look like. But before I share those, I just want to turn the floor over to Jennifer Lassar to discuss how the process unfolded in the Bay Area and LA as she worked on facilitating both efforts.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so we're in an interesting place in San Diego, in that we are sort of doing a combination of the things that have been done in the Bay Area. In the Bay Area, they back in 2017 to early 2019, when we weren't so far along in our housing policy work in California, they convened a working group for about 19 months, and they wrote the CASA plan. And from that, as the chair said, they created the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. That authority now is kind of in the early implementation stage and doing some early pilot programs, which is actually where Sandag is now, right? We're beginning to talk about these pilot programs that can be done with REAP 2.0 money. So BAFA is been approved by the legislature in early implementation phase. A lot of pre-work done in Los Angeles County. Senator Kamlager pretty much redlined the David Chu bill and got very close to getting that signed in the last session. And we spent there 10 weeks, 10 to 12 weeks, meeting weekly to go through different pieces of that bill. It was more complicated because in Los Angeles, they needed to create a fresh entity, whereas here in San Diego, I think we're really looking to Sandag to be that entity. So we have a structure. So we probably wouldn't have as much time to talk about structure. But the important things, I think, Chair, as you're going to get to, are really the policy choices around what the Housing Finance Agency would focus on, and how funding would be delivered. So happy to answer questions as you dig into details.
Great, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate grounding our efforts in the work of our neighboring jurisdictions who have to some extent already begun to blaze the trail for us so we can ride their coattails. So I think just stepping back, Senator Russo, who put this bill forward, is incredibly interested and open to hearing our local feedback and letting our local feedback really guide the process, because we know San Diego is not the Bay Area or LA. And so we know that, whatever we come up with needs to reflect the vision and values of our region. So I'm very excited to work on this. I think it's just an amazing opportunity. I think that we have to make this happen. It's just like such an important vehicle to actually be able to advance our housing efforts, because without this, it's really just a lot of talk and it's hard to have any action. So I think this is just such an important effort. And I'm grateful. I know Sandex staff has been working pretty hard on convening a task force of about 40 local stakeholders to provide input and feedback. So that being said, I've also been having dozens and dozens of conversations with folks about, what we would want this Regional Housing Finance Authority to be or to look like, and what the guiding principles should be to ground this effort. So just wanted to kind of share out some of the big themes that have emerged from my conversation that really resonated for me as well. So one of them is about affordability. The Bay Area and LA focused on 80% and below in terms of AMI. But I'm definitely hearing from a lot of folks, and I certainly agree with the sentiment that we should be looking at the whole range of housing needs to create a real ladder of housing opportunity, which includes low-income rentals in the missing middle and workforce housing, and first-time home ownership opportunities, and really hitting all the income tiers up to 120% of AMI. The second theme I've definitely heard emerge over and over, and it came up loud and clear already in our previous conversation today, is sustainability. And the importance of sustainability and how we think about our housing investments, that in fact, our housing solutions have to be hand in glove with our climate solutions and our sustainability solutions for our region, that we need to be addressing this nexus between housing and the climate crisis, and really, ending our reliance on an outdated greenhouse gas emission intensive sprawl development model, and instead promoting sustainable, environmentally friendly communities that are walkable and bikeable and have good access to jobs, schools, as Mayor Huebner mentioned, amenities, and transit, and also high performance green housing that can help us fight climate change and reduce our water consumption and carbon pollution. So that is what we heard loud and clear today, and I think is absolutely what I've been hearing in a lot of my conversations. Another theme, and it's really close to my heart, is about livability, that a home has to be a home. It's not just four walls and a roof, but we really need to be prioritizing how we invest in creating great communities that are diverse, that are mixed income, that are mixed use, that could include some businesses and commercial areas in addition to residential housing, so people can walk to the pharmacy, walk to the daycare, walk to the park, and have access to those amenities. And then another theme, and that I think is reflected in the title of this subcommittee, and definitely has come up loud and clear, is equity, and that the legacy of our housing system is highly segregated and inequitable communities, and the fact that one zip code is a primary predictor of health, income, and life expectancy is just extraordinarily problematic, especially given that kids go to school based on their district. So we need to be intentional in promoting mixed income communities that are inclusive and affirmatively further fair housing. And then the last theme that I've heard quite a bit on is just jobs, and making sure these are quality jobs for working class and middle income San Diegans, that we need to be ensuring that public investments in building housing also creates good quality jobs with fair wages and strong worker protections, so that we are building the middle class of San Diego County as we build the homes for the middle class in San Diego County. So those, I think that really summarizes a lot of what I think is so exciting about the idea of having a regional housing finance authority that could really embrace our values as a region, and moves us where we need to be in terms of San Diego County. But it's obviously still early, and I think it's important for us to take some time on this call to have a robust conversation about what we want to see in this bill, so we make sure that we're really building something that makes sense for our community. So with that, I'm going to open the floor for member comments.
Chair Lawson-Remer, did you want to take public comments first?
Seeing no member comments, sure. Let's start with public comments. Maybe our members will have some thoughts after that.
Thank you. I do not see any hands raised for public commenters.
Mayor Sotelo Solis.
Gracias, Chair. I think as we look for the greater good of, opportunities to finance all of our goals and, the opportunities to keep people in homes, build things that address climate change with the growing population. I think this is one of the tools in the toolbox that we should wholeheartedly support. Again, any piece of legislation, unfortunately, as we know, can get gutted and amended without people knowing. So we have to be hawks with this piece of legislation, that it doesn't get gutted and then it comes back with gobbledygook, and has nothing to do with any of those 5 efforts. I think it was 6 points, 6 points that you put on. The one thing that I would say, that as we build more housing, it's not only to address the existing need, but future needs. And I think was mentioned earlier, we know that, population is going to continue to grow, even though some statistics show that we're not growing as fast as we have in the past. It does create a demand on services. So whether it be public safety, if we build up higher because of density, we're looking at potentially a project that's 22 stories. How does our fire deal with, potential hazards? There's ways to do it. People in downtown have done it for decades. It's not like it can't be done, but how can a community like mine address those needs along with making housing affordable? So it kind of goes in tandem, and how we finance those concerns. I think for me, if it's broken down a little bit more, in the future, not today, but I think it would, am I going to have to go out for bond if we participate in something like this? Is it, as a whole, we're all saying we're going to chip in this money? Is it something that's going to be funded from the federal state government, and then we pull all these resources? Is it going to be how we, so more for me on the logistical part of this type of legislation, I think would be essential to understand. And then that way I can, share with my colleagues, this is why it's important to have a financing agency. So when we are looking to just increase the housing, not just, but we have the financing component, we can actually work on the services, again, for fire safety, for schools, even though schools are a different jurisdiction, we can continue advocating for more resources for the schools, talk about that open space, limited space that it is, really addressing the service component. So I think it's kind of that balance that I don't quite have a grasp on just yet, but I know we'll have a 20-point presentation that I'm sure staff will give later, but I'm very supportive of this, just knowing that, it's another tool in the toolbox.
Thank you, Mayor Huebner.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask some of those same questions, Mayor Sotelo Solis, about how is this going to work? Is this going to be funded by the state or whatever? And then it appears as if our REAP program might actually become the pilot program for this in terms of criteria. And almost all of the comments that we had on our previous item I seem to apply to this, because all of the criteria that you mentioned, all of the 6 points, applies. The one that you didn't go over as much, but I think is just as important to you as it is to the rest of us, and that is San Diego focus. We're not going to just take what San Francisco did or what LA tried to do and do it here. We're a completely different region with completely different needs, and I'm glad about that part being included. So is our task going to be helping Hueso's staff to write this, through our staff, or I'm not exactly sure where we go next on this, because it seems like we could just give them all that we said just a few minutes ago and say, okay, write something and state, come on, fund this for us, and then we'll see more affordable housing in all sorts of the cities throughout San Diego County.
Let me just respond to that question, Mayor Huebner. I think, yeah, they definitely need our help, writing this for sure. So, you know, I know they've asked for input, and that's why I put this on the agenda. So Jeff on my team is, you know, working on kind of trying to translate these bullets into something that is helpful for a legislative purpose. So if you want to do like a kind of get into the weeds, definitely he's working on this. They're working on this. They want our input. You know, but I think the purpose of this conversation right now is for us to sort of kind of all get on the same page on some big picture principles, so that we can at least share that with Senator Russo as they're drafting, so they know where we're at in terms of big principles, and they can iterate on the draft.
Good. Okay. I think that's all good. Yeah. So do you want us to have some offline conversations with you and or Jeff? Ewan?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, now also, like if you have ideas, let's put them out now and later, like all of it. I think this is, you know, they're moving fast. Senator West has said the bill, I think, is going to be heard in a couple weeks. So they're moving fast. So, you know, just trying to move as quickly as we can to keep up with this legislative cycle.
Is there any verbiage on the bill right now that we could look up on SB 1105?
There is, but they basically just cut and pasted the old San Francisco version, knowing they needed like a placeholder so that they could put something in. So they were very clear. They're like, this will not be what we are moving, but we have to put something in, or we can't move it out in a committee. So,
I mean, were they gutting and amending?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, you should look, but it's not very helpful. I think probably more helpful would be, you know, for us to really think together about what these principles are, so that then we can feed so then we can get another draft that's like a more real draft.
And so these finance authorities, the whole thing is that a city could apply to it when they have a project that a developer brought to them. Is that what?
So there's a couple things. So I did read the LA legislation and the San Francisco legislation. So I have some answers. This intersects with Mayor Sotelo-Solis's question. I can answer both together. So to answer your question first, Mayor Huebner, it could be both that would be my proposals, that it's both, that there's some regional money that is like allocated by this entity, this like housing finance authority, that's kind of invested strategically regionally. Maybe it's half is like regionally strategic, and the other half, I don't know, that was like a back of the envelope, but the other half goes to the cities to allocate to projects that make sense in their city. So I think you could do both. My view is you probably should do both, because there's going to be times where it makes sense for the cities to like be the entity making those decisions, and there's going to be times where you want sort of a more like regional, holistic, like assessment about, you know, where you would want to be investing. So I think that's the answer, is like we get to decide, I guess, but my view is that we should probably have both and not either or. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Excuse me for interrupting, because I'm just sort of brainstorming, and I don't know if this is possible. So in terms of like, I like the regional approach, because, you know, I think it has been discussed already that Sereno Valley is a great place for a lot of this housing, because that's where we have so many jobs, and you know, we've got transit coming in all there. So how can other cities contribute to that and maybe somehow get credit on their RENA or something? I mean, is there some way that, like, you know, because we have people who work.
No, that's such an interesting question that I don't think any of us have tackled. You know, your basic idea, is there a way to, because the way that these other housing finance authorities are doing it, the cities are not contributing to the authority. What they're doing is they're running like bond measures, and then they're using those bonds, the bond revenues, to do the investments, which I think makes a lot of sense. Like, obviously we need revenue, you know, if we're talking about building a lot of homes, we're going to have revenue. I think that makes a ton of sense. But what you've just outlined is something that I think we should definitely open as a possibility, right? That like, there's also the possibility of cities paying in. You know, it's not only about raising money, it's also about like kind of putting our cities together to work together.
Yeah.
But that's a new idea. I'll be honest. Like, that's was not in the Bay Area legislation or in the LA legislation.
Okay. Well, it's because we're San Diego.
That's right. Councilmember Shu.
Sure. I had several things to bring up. Well, with the last thought, if I could mention, it may be pretty difficult for us to get a lot of funding from the various cities at this point. I don't know if many cities may want to opt out of that unless they're forced to do so by the state, somehow. The version that I read so far of this bill calls for 6, I think, people to manage the authority. But in an earlier discussion, what I heard was that we may be using a structure at Sandag, or Sandag's REAP program was a precursor to this authority in some way. So is there some thought of then amending this legislation to have it be a part of Sandag and run as a authority that is an arm of Sandag, or is it a separate governing body? And if it's a separate governing body, then I think a lot of work needs to be placed into how many people and how they're selected.
I can just answer for myself, like my view, because it's not, I think this is the point of this conversation, is to kind of hash it out, right? I mean, I don't think there is a thing that's set. My view is that it should be through Sandag, that we have a structure, an intergovernmental structure, has lots of challenges, as we all know. But it overall, I think, does a good job of kind of bringing us together as a region, and why we don't need to like reinvent the wheel. So I think that would be my opinion. And we have these policy committees, and it seems like the policy committee structure seems to make sense, right? Where each sub-region has a seat on the policy committee, and then the county and the city has a seat. So you end up with 6 members based on 4 by, basically the way that our regional transportation committee set up, basically how all our policy committees set up. So that's just my opinion. Like, my opinion is that if we tried to create a new governance structure from scratch, we would spend all of our time talking about governance, and that I think we have a Sandag, and we should use it with great staff, and we should focus on the policies we want to implement instead of the reinventing the wheel. But that's just my opinion.
Sure, I think that's all those things are good points that we should consider. So APCD, with legislation from Todd Gloria, did form a new governance structure for air pollution control district. So that worked out pretty well. It's kind of interesting how the members were selected, but they're elected officials on a governing body, and I think that's moving forward. So to me, that's another model that was used for the air pollution control district, which serves our entire county. What I kind of worry about is how Sandag is doing with regards to other funding mechanisms, and that if we bring in housing, how the public would see that. So then there's this issue of as this legislation is enabling the various ways to get revenue, would that then mix into the systems that Sandag are getting revenues from now and maybe in the future? So and how the public would view all of that in terms of what they would ultimately ratify in terms of a revenue generation system. So I think that's my concern as we go forward. How is it going to play out? And I think the various parts of our communities have different views on Sandag. I guess that would be the best way to put that. So I think
so
we have
diplomatic.
so we should be cognizant of that in terms of making this authority being a part of Sandag or being a separate one. And so that may need some more discussion and analysis.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very helpful point. Mayor Huebner.
Yeah, the one thing that I foresee might be a little problematic about having Sandag do that is the weighted vote thing, that many times the smaller cities are outvoted on things. And if they're going to involve their own city, then maybe tally needs to be the vote that works on this particular housing finance authority. Or do what we used to do, which is you have to win both the tally and the weighted. I'm not sure if that's legal given AB 805 or whatever, but it's I could foresee some pushback by some board members on that.
But I think in terms of funding ability, what we did with Transnet was to assure there was some means to distribute funding in some manner to assure small cities do get some play in whatever funding structure that comes up, so that
Maybe it's population based or something. Yeah.
exactly, and that way I think it assures that small cities are going to be in play, and I think there may be some discussion on what is the criteria for the funding to happen, but as you know, so far I think we have criteria or priorities that should be pretty amenable to all cities. So we're helping all cities meet their RHNA numbers one way or another. So things like that. So I think we can build in those kinds of things in whatever the funding mechanism is, and for this authority to make sure that all cities are included, irregardless of their size.
That's helpful. I mean, I think that goes also to the question that Mayor Huebner asked previously about the funding allocation and the idea that there's value to having some funding that's locked in city by city, in addition to having some funding that's regional, so that there's a balance there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my only thing with that is I don't know how much money that would be for, you know, communities like ours where we've, you know, used every single dime that we have, how we leverage it. You know, here in-house, we use everything we got. However, if it comes back to us for fivefold, if we were to, and it's a guarantee through the bucket of, you know, our finance authority here that is being discussed, well, then that's a different story, you know. And is it within 5 years that we see that return on investment, or is it within the year that you give that you see that return on investment? So I think of a cundina, if you've ever heard of what this is. It's basically there's 10 of us, everybody puts in the $100 and you rotate who gets the $1,000. So not everybody gets the $1,000, but you know, we go around and January is my month, I get the $1,000. Jack gets February, you get March. And so if there were a way to earmark who and how the resources are allocated, you know, because some projects aren't project ready or shovel ready, you know, when the funds are available. But if they can be in 2 years, then maybe that's when it's their turn. It's hard because as elected officials, sometimes we're up, sometimes we're down. We're not always in the picture, but if there's a mechanism with which to get the money shuffled out, I think is something to consider.
Mayor Sotelo, I think not quite exactly what you're saying, but related. It's something I've heard as well from other people about the importance of there being like a reliable, steady stream, that it doesn't just all happen 1 year and then the money's all gone. But that actually it's a stream that you can count on for a good while. So just to say that it's not the identical point, but I think it's very similar, that there's like a need to have in order for projects to get ready, they need to know that in 2 or 3 years that there's going to be funding available for this project. So we don't want to just make money available 1 year and then whatever projects are ready, they get it, and then everyone else is out of luck. We need to kind of create a system so that people can make a plan for the future. Yeah,
and not like Social Security, eh? I mean, that we're all paying into that we don't even know if it's going to exist. We have to have some tangible.
I really like this subcommittee. It's so small. We can actually have a conversation. It's just great. I love this. Mayor Huebner.
Yeah, just one last thing. And where I was coming from with kind of the regional thing also is that I'm not the only small city who we've been denied funds because our units are too much per, the cost is too high per unit. And so we lose funds to, we were told, Vista and San Marcos, they could get far more units And that's true, part of our issue is one of the things that were noted in the near-term things that we're looking at is we have a conflict with the Coastal Act, visitor access, and state law, which is all about housing. And so our city-owned properties are beach parking lots. And so when we put them out for RFP, a developer comes forward, they must replace the beach parking. That adds to the cost. And so if the criteria is only about, price per unit, then we're going to lose out and, we don't get to build any affordable housing. So, but if we were able to, if it's too expensive here, if we don't get the money, then is there something else we could do to, to fill this gap of housing that we have in our whole region? So that's sort of my whole thought process on that.
Yeah, I think, we've talked about this, and I think you're 100% right. This is a huge challenge, and if we're trying to have equitable integrated communities, then it does cost more per unit in some places to build than others, and this is a set of trade-offs that we have to weigh and think about how to maximize all these objectives, all of which are important. So I am mindful. I want to be mindful of people's time. Do we have any additional public comments on this topic?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize. I wanted to call on Susan Baldwin. She did briefly have her hand up before you ask for member comments. And I see one other person's hand up, Catherine Rhodes. Susan, go ahead.
Thank you. The comment I wanted to make, it was actually more sort of a question on the housing task force, and is that a group that's going to continue to meet and give advice on criteria and the legislation and other things related to the work that the subcommittee is doing? And are those meetings public? I'm just curious about, whether those meetings are going to keep taking place.
I'll let the Sandex staff answer that if there's an answer. I think that's a question for Sandex staff.
Hi, thank you, Chair. So they are not public meetings. They're actually just meetings that staff is having with stakeholders, like we do on several of our projects, to really help us and speak to subject matter experts and those who are working in the housing space to educate staff as we continue to move items forward, and that we bring recommendations and feedback to this subcommittee for their consideration. But we're certainly open and would be happy to take additional suggestions for those who might want to be involved. But they're not public meetings, they're just stakeholder meetings, but we are always welcome for interested parties to participate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you still hear me? I don't know.
Yes. Yep.
Oh, okay. I was just going to suggest that I would be happy and would be honored to be one of those stakeholders, because I am on the Quality of Life Coalition housing team. I also am on the League of Women Voters Housing Subcommittee. That's part of their Public Policy Committee. And I'm also attend the San Diego Housing Federation Policy Committee meetings. So I feel like I'm following the affordable housing issue very closely as a volunteer. And so I feel like I would have a lot to offer in the realm of what you're working on. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, and Tessa, feel free to chime in, but I think you can email clerk@sandac.org and send them their contact information, and our clerk will get that over to me and our team.
Thank you.
That's correct, Tuari. clerk@sandag.org. If you email us, we will have staff respond. And the second speaker is Catherine Rhodes. Go ahead, Catherine.
Lovely. Thank you so much. This is Catherine Rhodes. And again, thank you so much for having all these conversations on housing. It's so wonderful. What I just kind of wanted to mention, I was looking at the law that was mentioned that might be, stripped out. And I saw that, some of the funding sources were like parcel tax or different things to do with property. But I'm actually thinking that you guys could put forward a transit occupancy tax. You know, transit occupancy tax belongs to the cities. And so if you put forward a transit occupancy tax for, you know, everybody, each city will get that amount of money for housing. And you could say, you know, San Diego has, I'm sure, a lot of hotels and stuff like that. So San Diego would get a lot of money for housing. And so I was thinking as a funding stream that would give you tons and tons of money. The first thing you could do is ask for transit occupancy tax, 2 or 3%. And then, you know, of course, all your board and everybody would have to approve it to get onto the ballot. And then the other part of money that is being left on the table that nobody is getting except for the city of Santee is that when all the transit occupancy tax ordinance were created, they were created before there was online travel agencies. And so now the city doesn't get the full, let's say in San Diego, the full 10.5% of the transit occupancy tax. They get a discounted rate, and the money that's that the city could have had is now going to out of town online travel agencies like Expedia. And so the solution is to do what the city of Santee did, is just say in your ordinance, we want to have online travel agencies be considered hotel operators. And if you had that on your, you know, along with a transit occupancy tax here, you guys could get so much more cash money for you. And one of the things for like, we also have the tourist marketing district. The tourist marketing district gets the full 2% because in their ordinance, they said that it includes online travel agencies as hotel operators. So they get the full 2%. The city of San Diego doesn't get the full 10.5%. But another way, the way you can't, you know, compare these is because when they did their ordinance for the short-term rentals, the short-term rental people like Airbnb, they're paying the full 10.5%. So they're paying it, just the regular hotels aren't. And if you guys fix this problem, there's free cash that could come to all of you that are going outside of the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chair, I think you just need to mute your other device.
Okay.
Perfect. And there are no other public commenters on this item.
Chair, one last thing, as we talk about all of these elements, I really just want to emphasize too on how we all have all of this conversation with lowering our greenhouse gas emissions. And you know, the environmental component I think is essential. I mean, we had a regional plan that we just passed that, you know, has specific goals for 2030 and 2050. So again, along with the 171 and then your own numbers, how what we're talking about is going to get us to our climate action goals, whether it be our plans individually, but through the regional plan as well. So I think we just need to keep emphasizing those things as well. All right, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So I guess this is a question for Tuari and staff. Do you feel like you have enough from this conversation here, this discussion, to work further with Senator Wesso's staff as we refine this legislation over the next couple weeks?
Yeah, I think we'll want to coordinate and work with the housing, you know, stakeholders that we mentioned as well to make sure that we're bringing a couple of other voices into the conversation. And then I will need to coordinate with our internal government relations team. So we can certainly, I think, get back to you on if there's further information or details that we need. And we're happy to continue to keep bringing this item before the subcommittee at your next meeting.
Great. And I think I would also just encourage everyone here, you know, to reach out to Sandex staff if you have sort of specific follow-up ideas, because my understanding is the legislation is moving quite quickly, and I think is supposed to be heard again in the end of April. And the idea would be to have something significantly improved by then for the Senate to look at as it gets into the next committee up in Sacramento. So I think we should definitely be focused on this. I just want to say I am just really excited. I think there's it just feels in all my conversations with folks that there's a lot of like shared vision around these pieces, and it's not going to be easy to do any of this at all. But I do think the fact that we do share a vision, and that, the kind of the comment that Alejandra made that Mayor Solis made just a moment ago, that, we're doing all of this work around housing, and that we always are also thinking about, our environmental footprint and, how we build a sustainable San Diego as well, for future generations. And I think that really echoes what I've heard from so many stakeholders. So I am just so excited to keep working on this. And, if you want to talk to me or talk to my team, or, if people have specific ideas for Sandex staff, I think we should all just be like kind of thinking together so we can get another round of legislation in the next couple of weeks that captures what was discussed today, because I thought it was just really, really, really positive and really solid. So that being said, I don't need a motion, right, clerk? Where it was just it's just a discussion item.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, and so then I can adjourn our meeting. We do have our next meeting is coming up. I think it's May 4th. So mark your calendars. Tessa, do you think you could share for folks the specifics on that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just going to say that your agenda is agendized to discuss your upcoming meetings. So we do need to take public comments if there are any. And then I do understand that you have informed staff that you would like to have the next committee meeting on May 4th. And that you were going to let them know that in this meeting. And I do not see any public commenters.
Okay, so there's no public comment on this item?
Correct. Yes.
Okay,
Chair.
great. Yeah, so my proposal was for May 4th for our next meeting, and that would give us, a good month to work through a lot of these issues. And I think we had said 2:00. So I guess I'd like to ask Sandex staff to follow up with members to make sure this works for everyone and to get it on calendars.
We will do that, Chair.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, this has been a wonderful meeting. I love that we are small enough of a group we can talk to each other and work through some challenging ideas. So this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks.